Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, whatever time you were watching this recording. Welcome to the Gold Coast Speakers podcast, where speakers have conversations so that you can learn more about the speaker, what they talk about, and who they are. My name is Mark Butler, and I have the pleasure of talking to Katrina Casaclang again today. I've known Katrina. We've been part of the same speakers group for some time, and we've had some very energizing and engaging conversations together, which is what prompted this idea of us coming together to record some of that for you to get a deeper insight into what Katrina talks about. Katrina, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Mark. And as you know, you've so kindly introduced me. I'm Katrina Casaclang, and about a year and a half ago, I established Valued Asset Coaching and Consulting, and that's a coaching and consulting business that focuses on the middle management space, predominantly in the not-for-profit, government, small business sector, where I feel there's a really big need to support those managers that have probably been put into roles with little or no leadership experience, excellent at their jobs on the ground, but not often have been supported in that leadership space. And yeah, I just think it's a critical space to help people with. So yeah, that's where I'm at now.
Fantastic. And look, that makes sense. People in leadership roles very often are taught about the systems and how to deliver on that, but very less so about the human person-to-person aspect of it. And you have a fascinating background that we've spoken about at length before. You've come from policing into the not-for-profit space. And I believe you're not the only member of the family. You're not a maverick in this space either. And I just found it fascinating, your journey. Can you just share a little bit about what that transition, if you like, taught you about, maybe about leadership and what people maybe wouldn't expect?
I'm definitely not a maverick in my family. I am one of 5 brothers and sisters, but 3 of us joined the police force and followed in my father's footsteps. So yeah, my father was a long-term policeman and country policeman at that. So here I grew up moving to little country towns where Dad was he's been the lockup keeper, the sergeant in charge. We lived in police residence. So I grew up with the police station right next door to me. Back when small police stations held prisoners, my mum cooked and fed the prisoners, and people knocked on our door at any time of the day or night to speak to somebody, and our phone was also the police phone. So yeah, I grew up with it kind of part of my life. And yeah, so I joined at 18 years of age, which sounds crazy now in this day and age.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So you graduated
yep.
at what age as a police officer?
19, I had just turned 19. I turned 19 a week before I graduated. So you had to be 19 to graduate. So yeah, I had just turned 19 and went on to do 13 years in general duties, surveillance with the National Crime Authority, and surveillance with the Child Protection Enforcement Agency, and then back to uniform out in Blacktown, which was extremely busy.
Well, you did the child protection space, and that's where your not-for-profit experience then came from, wasn't it? Did you join a child protection agency? What was the not-for-profit space?
No. So after I left the police force, I kind of transitioned. We moved up to Queensland, and I then went into restorative justice, and then went into a community development role with Queensland Police, working on a project at the southern end of the Gold Coast. I think it was that community development, working after coming from, I was still working in restorative justice, and yeah, just working and building connections with the community. I got sort of asked to come across and take a role with, at the time it was called Cisco, and it was more programs that were for young people who were disengaged from school, getting them back into vocation or education, training, employment. So yeah, I worked there for 15 years, finishing up in a mental health, big mental health organisation for young people. So yeah.
And I think, as we've spoken before, in that role or in those roles, delivering information to whoever's in front of you, generally speaking, it's not always good news you're delivering. So you develop a skill set, don't you, at having to deliver, and having caring, critical conversations that aren't exactly warm and fuzzy for everybody in front of you, which we're seeing more and more in leadership today, having to sell a strategy that they've had no involvement in developing to a team that's already overwhelmed and frustrated. So, and this is a skill set that I think we both believe is troublesome or difficult for middle management today. And so do you think that was an interesting training that you had in your years doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. It's only now as I reflect back and I see how much of those skills that I actually developed very early in my career and in policing, especially, as soon as you've got a little bit of a couple of years rank, you're often put in positions where you really are taking on the leadership role, you're the most senior person on the truck or most senior person in the station. And so you learn, and as you just said, you're going to jobs where you're giving incredibly tragic news, or you're going to a scene that's tragic, and you're dealing with crowds and people, and you're taking statements, and things that most people would never ever be exposed to in their life. You're kind of doing not just daily, maybe 3 and 4 times a day.
Okay, yeah.
You're going from job to job to job. So I think you learn to communicate in a way. You meet people on their level. You learn to be able to have really tough conversations, and then next minute you might be arresting somebody and you're having to sort of be really firm and hold boundaries and follow the letter of the law. So it's hard to articulate, but I think a lot of what we're talking about now, or what people read in books, is what I learned it just was sort of natural, came to me. And, I said before, I'd watch my father do it. I'd watched him pick us up, and my mum and dad move us to a new town and integrate us into a community and develop relationships very quickly and build stakeholder relationships with the community, because that was critical to be a policeman in a small town. I learned to have those conversations, but I think that is one of the most critical things of leadership, of learning how to sort of navigate difficult conversations, but still hold that,
Yeah.
clarity and that decision making, and be confident in what you're conveying.
Yeah, you described them as translators before, between leadership and teams, and it sounds that's what it seems to me you're describing now. So you developed as a 19-year-old the
Yeah.
skill set to be able to calm a situation down, deliver bad news to somebody, and deliver
Yeah.
good news to somebody at the same time in a highly emotionally charged environment, which is kind of where leaders, I think, are finding themselves today. So
Yeah.
translators is probably a very good description of it. Yeah.
Especially for middle managers, that translator role is, often just come from being amongst the team and being one of the team, and understand their challenges or what they're wanting to achieve or their needs. And then suddenly you're in this role where you're also getting messages from above, from the more executive level. And somehow you have to kind of, change the form of that message into
Yeah.
one that is going to be received or from either side. And it's not always easy. And I think that's what
Mm.
really traps new managers or new leaders, because they get very confused as to where their alliances sort of
Yes,
sit. Or
they need to be completely engaged with the team and to build that trust, knowing that sometimes the information they have to deliver to them is not that valuable. And leaders
yeah.
lie awake at night doing that, but as a 19-year-old, you had to do it several times a day. And we talk about burnout, and just even thinking, and I don't mean to harp on completely about the police background, but I'm drawing such strong lines between the two. But even your dad, his career, we talk about burnout. Probably post-traumatic stress is a bigger issue for policing, but burnout certainly would be in there as well. But when you cannot switch off and your entire life is your job, and the home phone is also the police phone, so if it rings, it's got to be answered, and it's got to be answered by dad. And these are situations that people had to manage. And even well-intentioned leaders today will unintentionally contribute to their own burnout. Where do you think it's happening today?
Look, I think it's so complex. Everything's complex. I think we like to always kind of give and I'm guilty of it myself, give an answer to one thing. But I do think one of the biggest things is people go into leadership and suddenly think it's a separate role completely disregard who they are as a person and what they bring to that role from home and what the people they're leading bring from home. And so we find people either want to be such micromanagers and want total control of a situation, or want to go, I just want to be the boss I wanted to have and be so friendly and sort of too lax, I guess. Yeah. Yeah. Be everybody's friend. And and it just, neither is going to work because they're forgetting who they are. And they're not only that, they've got the issues that they're bringing from home, whatever that might be, whatever stage of life they're in, they've got their own, things happening, and everybody they're managing is. So I think it's stop trying to see leadership as something completely separate and start just being honest with who you are as a person and who you can reach out to mentor or to follow or to guide you, or who to listen to, and just slowly build those skills and acknowledge what skills you have yourself and bring them out, and have that confidence in yourself as a person as you build those leadership skills, rather than just thinking, I have to be something, I have to be this other,
Yeah.
leadership is this other entity.
And I'm expected to have all the answers, therefore I'd better give an answer to this question.
Exactly.
And I remember one of the best leaders I ever had, one of her best responses was, if I ask a question, I don't have an answer to that. Let's find out together. And it was honest. It was a little vulnerable, but I was never going to try and steal her position or anything like that. But it just made me think, okay, it's not a dumb question. It hasn't come up before, and that means maybe I'm clever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It sort of made me feel better. But as a boss, I can still remember to this day feeling, okay, let's find out together. I'm involved. There's agency control. It's almost job crafting to some extent. Do you find that leaders feel like they have to have the answers all the time? Or do you come across ones who are comfortable saying, I don't know, let's find out?
Oh, look, there definitely are. And I think I was one of those leaders. And I think that's why I didn't really realize how big an issue leadership was until, I know it sounds really probably naive, but until really a couple of years ago, doing a role where I was supporting leaders. But because I always led like that, I did have bosses who were absolutely, everybody looked up to them. They did have all the answers. But I also knew that nobody can possibly have all the answers.
Yes.
And being in a role where when I was out on the road, I had to have the answers. I knew that you can't have all the answers. We always went back and would, maybe get advice from the detectives, or get advice from a sergeant, or get advice from someone else. I sort of started my career sharing, always getting advice. That was what you learnt to do. Yes, sometimes you did have to make a decision, but then when it came to whether you're going to charge somebody or what the next course of action was, you always sort of, got advice from somebody. So I always learned that, and even when I went into my first major role of leadership, like as a program manager, and I had a team of about, I think, 15 youth workers and social workers, I was like, okay, well, who in this team? This is all new to me, being in this not-for-profit space. I'm here to lead you, but what are the skill sets that everybody have? So I sought out what skills they had, and I looked at ways I could elevate that. And I listened to people around me. So I do think there are leaders like that, but I also do think the biggest trap for people going into their first leadership role is to think that they have to know it all, and are too scared to ask somebody for advice, too scared to admit that they might not know anything. And so they fall into this terrible cycle of wanting to have all the answers, and then people starting to not trust them or not believe them or respect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If we try to pretend something we're not, it doesn't usually last, and I'm from an age when we learned leadership skills from watching TV, and learning leadership skills from The West Wing or something, or one of the old cop shows. Probably not the best place to, not the best role models, if you like. We now have, I think, for the first time ever, I believe there's 5 generations in the workforce today, and everything from, the older style, leave your troubles at home, you're here to work, to a teaspoon of cement and harden up, to the hub and spoke kind of manager that needed to have contribute or demand the answer to every question, as opposed to leaving teams work for themselves and
Yeah.
show some initiative, etc. Younger generations they wear their heart on their sleeve a lot more, I think. What do you think leaders are maybe misunderstanding about different generations now? Do you think it's a problem?
Oh, I think, yeah, it's definitely a problem. You just
Mm.
talk to anybody, in your social network or in your community, and every conversation you'll have, there'll be somebody whinging about either the younger staff, or if I'm talking to younger people, they'll be whinging about the older staff. It's probably honestly,
Not true.
it's not funny, but it makes me laugh how we often talk about the other generations like they're from another planet, like
Mm.
they're not the same children that we've actually raised to be outspoken, to question things. When it comes to the workforce, everyone wants to talk to them like, who are these people? But I think it's probably the biggest problem we've ever had for a long time, because I don't remember that being a problem when I started in the workforce. And as you said, we
Yeah.
often learnt our leadership skills from what we had seen on TV. And so if a boss screamed at you and demanded you to do something, you didn't question it, you just did it. Now, looking back, was that right? Definitely not. Probably,
No.
definitely not. So, but we didn't question it. And so
Yeah.
for the first time ever, we're questioning things and we're wanting to do things differently, and we value different things. We know we're going to have a lot of young people know they're going to have a lot of different careers or different workplaces in the lifetime. We're likely to be here for 30 years, even if we're
Yeah.
not. We started thinking that was the sort of the plan. So yeah, it's a huge issue. I don't
Huge.
know. What do you think from your
Well,
experience?
it's really interesting, and I don't know, is it a pendulum swinging one way and now it's swinging too far the other way, and it'll sort of come back and settle? I'm not really sure, but the challenges that younger generations have today, kind of, as we were saying, we didn't have, but I respect hugely the challenges that they do sort of have, because they have
Mm,
an ability to speak more openly about things like mental health challenges, etc.
yep.
And I think there was a book I read. The conversation was, somebody who's born today has a life expectancy of well in excess of 100 years, right? And so when they join the workforce, now I read this before AI was a conversation, so who knows
Mm.
where it's going to take us with universal basic incomes and all the rest of it, and what jobs will look like. But the argument or the conversation then was, look, if we're going to live to 100 plus years, we're not going to retire till we're 80 or 90 years of age. Now, how many generations are going to be in the workplace? And what opportunity does a 20-year-old have when their boss is 90 years of age and doesn't look like they're going anywhere anytime soon? There's 70 years that they've got to try and make their way up through the system. It made for a really interesting conversation. As I said, look, I
Yeah,
don't know if it's relevant anymore or not. I think it makes for a very interesting conversation. But
yeah.
in terms of where are we at today with younger people, and younger generations, I have huge faith in them rescuing the planet from the work we've done to it. They offer a huge amount, and they're coming into the world with a different mindset to we had, and therefore with different solutions to and outcomes. So I have great faith in it. I'm not worried or concerned about it at all, but I may
Yeah.
not understand how best to lead somebody like that unless we just give them free rein and tell us what we can do to support them. A
I think,
leader that supports their people. We don't employ somebody to do what we tell them to do. We employ someone to tell us what to do. And I think that there's some great wisdom in that. Yeah, I really
yeah,
do. Yeah.
I agree. I think that's the key. I think we've probably gone a little bit pendulum swung a little bit too far, and there's a little bit of old school mentality of building that attitude to work and loving your job. I guess the last couple of years, or probably prior to that, but people, I don't work to live. And it's a great concept. And we want to
Yeah.
have I work to live, but we do want to have a balance in life. But I've had some of the best times of my life at my job, and some of my best friends have come from work.
Yeah.
So I think it's finding a nice little balance. So we want young people to do what they're really interested in. Passion is probably a little bit of an overused word, but something they're interested in and something that they feel they can contribute to. And as leaders, you want to be able to harness some of those skills. You want to, rather than trying to squash them down because you're frightened of them overtaking you, harness them, find
Mm.
projects, find opportunities to showcase the people around you, like build that team around you to be even better than you. Like
Yeah.
a leader's job is to kind of just manage the pieces. not to, be the star of the show.
Yeah,
It's about supporting those people around you to sort of excel. And even if there's not a leadership role for them, give them leadership opportunities, allow them to flourish.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because they will contribute in other ways to the role and to the leader's reputation as well. And
Yeah.
yet, as we say all of this, burnout is still probably the biggest challenge in workplaces today.
Yeah.
There's all conversations around psychosocial hazards and everything else like that.
Yeah.
But burnout is very much still a huge issue for people. And some will declare it and others can't. How much do you think burnout is structural rather than the individual? So is it a systems problem or is it a person problem?
I think it's a combination of both. I think it's
Right.
definitely a systems problem. I think the expectation, the IT, the AI, all of the apps, all of these systems we've put in place to make work easier, for some people can make it far more complex and far more
Mm.
complicated. It doesn't suit all sorts of learners or all sorts of workers. But I think also where it's a people problem is when you're not supported. People want to
Mhm.
feel valued and supported. It's a basic human instinct. And it doesn't matter what you're doing. And if you go back to the police force, I think a lot of PTSD doesn't particularly come from what they're seeing. It's then impacted by the fact that you get back and you're not supported by leadership or your boss, or there's not even, back in my day, there wasn't even like, gosh, that was a hard job. Are you okay? There was just literally get on to the next job, or how come, the 400 RBTs that were set for this shift haven't been done, or then you had higher systemic issues, or the media where all you ever saw was what had been done wrong. So I think not feeling supported is one of the biggest contributors to burnout. And again, going back to that translator role, the executives not listening to what you're trying to say is happening on the ground, and just wanting to keep adding more and more pressure without really stopping and going, okay,
Yeah.
how does this affect our team? Yeah.
So we're not being listened to, and they just keep adding more, do more with less. Nobody's listening to our feedback of what's going on and how we could do things better.
Yeah.
So we don't feel like we belong. We don't feel like we matter. And as you were just saying, Dr. Gabor Mate is an absolute expert. He started in addiction, but all addiction is trauma centered and focused and trauma based. So so like PTS, as you were saying, post traumatic stress, it's not so much the event; it's actually how we've processed it afterwards.
Yeah.
And Gabor Mate says that it's not what happened to you; it's what you've done with what happened to you. And if there's no support, or it's brushed under the carpet, then that's going to be the outcome. And I believe, and I think you're saying exactly the same thing.
I think people also have to take personal responsibility of, is this the right job for them? They go into a role sometimes and everything just is not fitting. It doesn't sit with their values. It doesn't sit with their core beliefs, or the work isn't enjoyable, but they'll keep pushing and pushing to stay in this role. Some people have to have a role that they don't love, but I'm talking about, you know, they've gone into a career choice of a role and they're really not enjoying it, and it's not what they thought it was. There has to be some personal responsibility to go, you know what, this is not the right place for me, and leave. And I did that after 13 years in a job that I loved, but it just, one day I woke up and went, I'm not loving this anymore.
This is not
It's
good
not
for
fair to
me.
the community, it's not fair to the people I work with to not be giving my best. And so I chose to leave. But yeah, if you are loving the job and you are doing everything, but yeah, you're constantly not feeling valued, you're constantly being undermined, or you're constantly, the the goalpost is changing all the time. You get your team to do one thing and then they do that, they achieve that, and then, oh no, that's not right, we're going this way. Like, that's when you start to get burnout in people who are truly passionate about what they're delivering, but never feeling that they're being recognized or valued or acknowledged.
It's this whole concept of mattering, or the kind of the psychology of feeling significant. It's
Yeah.
it's a it's an instinct. It's a survival instinct. We have to know
Yeah.
that we can collaborate and cooperate, and what we're delivering is valued by somebody else.
Yeah.
It's such an important part of any leader's role, really,
Yeah.
and indeed the people that they're leading. I say you've worked in systems where decisions don't always make sense. on the ground or to the team. And that's what we're talking about here. People,
Yeah.
we might not feel supported, we might not be listened to.
Yeah.
So do you think in that case, the burnout that people experience would be structural then?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where good leaders really sort of come into their own, because there'll always be times when an executive decision is made, or it could be, if you're working in not-for-profit, it could be a government decision, it could be a change of programs or a change of direction. In policing, it could be a law. It could be a law that you don't particularly agree with, but you have to follow through. So there'll often be decisions that are very hard to translate to understanding on the ground. But I guess that's where a good leader, that's where that translate to understand what the purpose is and how you can make that purpose meaningful to the people who've got to deliver it. And it
Yeah.
can be very hard, but that is your job. And that's where you have to go, okay, somehow I have to understand why, and what's the why that's going to work for the people that have to do this role. And,
Yeah.
hopefully you can translate that so that even if they don't particularly agree with it, they can still get the job done to the best of their ability. But yeah, when it's really conflicting, that's when, you're going to have huge issues. Yeah. So
So that raises the point, like you've worked in not-for-profits. Do you see compassion fatigue in leaders? Did you come across that? Or even in the police force? Was that something
oh,
that you recognized? And is it something that exists for leaders outside of the not-for-profit today, do you think?
I think it's getting very difficult to navigate. I mean, we've got the new laws on psychosocial safety and all of
Yeah.
that. I think if you talk about compassion fatigue, I think it's incredibly difficult. I think it's a huge issue in any caring industry of wanting to always do the right thing, wanting to care. But the reality of uh, humankind is not everybody's nice. Not everybody's, sorry. It's very hard sometimes to always be kind and caring and empathetic. And where it also really impacts you is when you go out into the private life. So if you work in not-for-profit or you work in a caring field and you're always seeing the most extreme side of life. And then you go to the barbecue on a Sunday and everybody's just talking about the football game, or they're talking talking derogatory about what they saw in the news and the way something was presented, but you've seen the other side of it.
Yeah.
That's where it gets really difficult.
Mm.
It's fine when you're amongst your peers and you're flying the same flag,
Yeah.
but it's when you kind of go out in that outside world and it's like you come out of your bubble and the rest of the world doesn't think the same way as you do.
Yeah.
That's where it can get very difficult for people in those caring professions. So, and
Yeah.
yeah,
And especially for leaders, because they have to care about the work that's been done, but also the people in their charge. And and we see leaders all the time who sort of take on the emotional frustration of the team and try to protect them from senior management or senior leadership, who are
yeah,
delivering a strategy. And the middle manager then is trying to, they're squeezed in the middle and they're trying to protect their team, and they take on that emotional toll. So it's almost like they're swimming in a soup of everybody else's emotion. That's got to affect leaders, do you think? Yeah, it's because that's hard to step away from.
yeah. And I can give you a personal example of that. I remember my mum, we lost my mum 10 years ago to breast cancer, but she had secondary cancer. And so I'm dealing, and my family's dealing with that. I was exceptionally close to my mum. I'm turning up to work every day and I've got youth workers and case managers that are dealing with some of the most vulnerable young people, and they're exhausted and they're tired or they've got struggles. But then personally, I've got this happening in the background and spending nights at
Mm,
the hospital, and you just have to and it can really, really get you down.
mm,
And I think bringing it right back to where we started, people don't walk out the door at home and then walk into work and become different people.
yeah,
They're not. And, as I was managing those people, I know within that team, they all had their own complex personal relationships going on, and that impacts. So you basically like mother hen, trying to keep all these staff happy, and then, throw in a change of government and a change of program, and then you're facing people might be losing jobs. Like, it's incredibly, incredibly difficult to work in that space that's on a 3 to 4 year cycle where you put your heart and soul into a project, heart and soul into working with, whoever the client is that you're working with. In our
Yeah.
case, it was young people.
Those
And
without a
then,
voice very often. Yeah. Yeah. And that sort of doubles the responsibility on us to ensure that we have a resolution for them. That
yeah,
can be
absolutely. And
exhausting.
so the fatigue that you speak of, yeah, it's a major risk, a
Major risk.
major risk.
And it
Yeah.
used to be compassion fatigue was kind of the domain of, health and the health sector and first responders, etc. But I think in our fast world today, it's probably impacting a lot more customer service teams, as an example.
Ah,
Insurance assessors, journalists. There are all sorts of industries now that I think are affected by just the overwhelm that we're talking about. Um, and so I was going to ask you if you'd ever seen a strong team or a leader that's been impacted by decisions outside of their control. I think you've already alluded to it, that was your personal experience. But is it something I can't imagine you felt like you're again a maverick in that space?
no, there'd be so many. Yeah, and I've lots of examples. Like, I think if you are a good leader, I think it's probably one of the riskiest workplace risks that you have is that compassion fatigue. And as you
Mm.
said, it's actually in every industry. There is not if you are a good leader and you care and you empathize for your team and you're understanding, and I think that's probably one of the side effects of younger generations coming through as well. They're far more open with their lives. There's a lot more sharing, and I've always had teams that we've been incredibly close.
Mm.
And so as you learn more about what people are going through as a leader, you've got to keep those boundaries. You've got to keep the expectations of work performance and what needs to be done. But you've also got this side of you that is understanding, is empathetic, is caring. So I don't think it doesn't matter what industry you're in, that's always going to be a difficulty. And sometimes you don't even realize that's what's happening because,
Yes.
as I said, you could be going through your own stuff at home. And
Yeah.
so it becomes very blurred as to, well, what's work? What's me? Is it me?
And so then if someone was listening to us right now and was thinking, "Oh God, that's me," what's one shift that they could make immediately to kind of reduce that emotional load, do you think?
Oh, I don't know if there's exactly one shift. I think the first thing would
Yeah.
be just to recognize it, to recognize that it's okay and that it's a sign that you probably are a caring, empathetic person. Don't be hard on yourself. That would be
Yeah.
the first thing. Be kind to yourself. You're probably kind to everybody else. Be kind to yourself.
Self-compassion. Yeah, we're not very good at that, are we? We tend not to be. Yeah, we're our worst critic. I saw some statistics recently that said the self-critical voice, we're speaking, we'll say, at about 160, 170 words a
Yeah.
minute at the moment. Our self-critic talks to us at somewhere between 400 and 2,000 words a minute because we don't have to finish sentences. We know what we
Yeah.
mean, right?
Yeah.
And there was another statistic many years ago I heard or learned that said we talk to ourselves uh, at that sort of pace, but also we have more conversations with ourselves than all other conversations combined.
Yeah.
So if we can't train ourselves to be a bit more compassionate to ourselves around
Yeah.
what we're experiencing, it's everyone in the world experiences this. There's 8 billion
Yeah.
people talking to themselves in this way, and so it's learning to sort of have that compassion to go, I've probably been caring too hard and too long for the people I'm working with right now,
Yeah.
and maybe I should just give myself a break. I'm only
Yeah.
human.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Definitely.
I think that's
Definitely.
the one shift
Yeah.
people could make is, yeah.
And then reach out to somebody. Reach out. If your
Like,
workplace has an EAP, not that, or if you have a mentor, or you have, a private your GP. The same thing everybody says, but I can't say it strongly enough. Speak to somebody,
mhm.
even if it is just another person in your, a friend who's in your industry, and just let them know this is how you're feeling, and there's lots of things. There's so much self-care. I discovered, reformer Pilates a couple of years ago, and I love it. To find something that you can do
Is
for yourself, I think, is important.
so
Yeah.
that's your sort of release, if you like? It's beautiful. Yeah.
Amongst other things, like, I'm a avid podcast listener. I listen to everything, read everything. But yeah, as far as doing some exercise, reformer Pilates, I find my brain doesn't have to think about it. Yeah, it's great. Mm.
My line with burnout has always been find your joy, because it's the first thing that gets jettisoned when we're overwhelmed, or I'm too busy and I'm not operating at full speed like I used to. So it means I have to put in more hours just to achieve what I used to achieve. And so the first thing to go is any sense of fun that we would have had.
Yeah.
And so find something that gives that back to you, I think. Would be the other piece of advice I'd give to people, who need to reduce the emotional load. Find something that's fun, spontaneous fun without any consequences. And look, it doesn't have to be uproariously laughing or anything like that. You found reformer Pilates. Some people would say, "Oh, that's exercise." No, depending on, it's the mindset you go into it. Is if it's an act of love for myself, well, then that's joy, right?
And it's different because I would, join gyms, wouldn't go to a gym or anything, but it actually, for me, it is joy. I actually feel really, really good about it. The other thing I would say,
and it's an
is
achievement. Every single workout is an achievement. You don't have to win anything, but I turned up and I did it and I feel better.
Yeah,
What's
and
not to
it's
love?
and my body's moving. I can't really explain it, but it just works with my brain. But the other thing I would say, and something I learned in the police force, there used to be a saying that still would be there, but there's no more X than an X, which used to sort of signify that once you've left, nobody cares. So don't burn yourself out. So I would still kind of say a similar thing to the team that I was leading. When I would identify that they're struggling, or they're not well, or just something's not quite right and they need a little bit of time, I would say, you're no good to anybody. This is not new. I know 1,000 people have said this, but just that reminding yourself that you're no good to anybody if you fall apart and you can't turn up. So get yourself, recognize it early, take the time if you need it, if you need the time off or you need to speak to somebody or whatever it might be. It might be as simple as just being able to actually vocalize it and talk to somebody, but just reminding yourself you're not that important that you need to put yourself into the point where you can't turn up
Into harm's
and
way.
everything. Yeah. Nobody is that important that they can't take some time off and have that break. I think we can get a bit martyrish that, oh no, it won't go on if I'm not here. Well, it will. I promise you it will.
I promise you, you're not that
It
important.
will. Everybody is replaceable.
That would be a very interesting tattoo, wouldn't it? I promise you, you're not that important.
Yeah.
Just a great message in there. Yeah, totally.
Well, and I think that's the most important for people who are important, because yes, you are critical, but if you fall over and can't turn up to work at all, or throw in your resignation because you've just had enough, or you haven't stopped to think and you get unwell or sick, then we still have to replace you. So it's counterintuitive, I know, but it's fact.
It is a fact. And in fact, I was going to ask you a question. If an organization brought you in to speak or to run a workshop, what's the core message you'd want leaders to walk away with? And I suppose we can't finish saying you're not that important. That can't be it. So I'm imagining you have another one. So like, what's Katrina's number one message?
Well, I get called in for different reasons, but my main thing would be that, probably going back to that translator. You've been given this opportunity, or you've been moved into this leadership role, not because you are so special and that you're the rule maker of everything. You're the controller of everything. So I guess it does come back to you're not that special. Your leadership skills are what's special, and your ability to bring the team together and bring them on board is what's special, and to translate, the messages between the executive and the team, that's what's special. But your role is not to direct and manage and micromanage everyone, and everything doesn't rely on you. But it's basically, my message is, look within, look at the skills and the values and the talents that you have, and how you can help use those to get the best out of your team. So that's, to me, what a good leader in any industry is. Somebody who can bring out the best in the team and who values the organization they work for.
And so, and to be able to do that, then, what do you think leadership needs to look like over the next few years if organizations want to keep their people?
Look, it's going to change whether you're very high executive sort of business. I don't want to speak for the finance industry or big corporate, because I haven't really worked in that space. But I think leadership has to be, you have to be a bit of a chameleon. I think you have to value the organization you work for and value work, value your role and your contribution. But I think it's going to be somebody who is empathetic, who can speak the language of what people, the people that they're leading, and understand or have that ability to understand. And then, as I said, be able to take that message from the people they're leading above and vice versa, take the message of, what the vision of the organization is back to the people working for them, and somehow, manage those concerns and issues and gripes and things that always happen, think about retail or any of those, and build that team up. So
it seems to be human-centered, doesn't it?
Very much.
We've no idea where technology is taking us.
Yeah.
So I think the best leaders are going to be the ones who can support their people.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, I keep forgetting about that. I get caught up in the human side. But a good leader actually does know a little bit about everything as well. I think that's really important. A good leader is someone who, when they were on the ground, took that interest to learn how things happen. The person who just does their job and says nothing else is my problem, it's, not my pay grade, they're not going to make the good leaders. So good leaders moving forward are those people who are interested in everything and how the business works. Might not be their core job, but they're willing to learn. So I think that's another key part of it. You've got to be a lifelong learner to be a good leader. You've got to be open to, pivoting, changing tack, learning new skills. And even if you don't have to be expert at it, you've got to have a little bit of knowledge in everything.
And just be ready for what's coming.
Be ready.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything you'd want people to know about Katrina as a speaker?
I don't think I'm particularly different to other people. I think everybody has something really important to say, and I think it's finding the right fit for what your message is, or why you're wanting to get a speaker. Like what are you trying to convey to your audience? But I think what I do bring with is I bring a huge range of experience and a depth of different workplaces, different types of leadership styles, different experiences and stories, and even, like I said, the skills that I have from just my upbringing and where I've been in life and the things I've done in life, I think lend themselves to
They're definitely
an audience that wants a bit of reality, wants just a bit of I'm not a textbook sort of straight out of how it should be. It's kind of a bit of life experience.
Yeah. Fantastic. Katrina, thank you so much for
That's
your
okay.
time.
Thank you.
I've really enjoyed our conversation. And
Thank you.
I would say to anybody who's watching us now, thank you for joining us today on the Gold Coast Speakers podcast. If you would like Katrina to speak at your next event right here on the Gold Coast or elsewhere, I can personally recommend Katrina as a speaker that will deliver to your audience. Head over to the Gold Coast Speakers directory at goldcoastspeakers.com.au and you can find all of the links and contact details for Katrina and a whole range of amazing speakers. So thanks once again, Katrina, for your time and allowing me the honor of having this chat with you and getting to ask all of those questions.
Thanks, Mark. Likewise. I listen to you all day too.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Gold Coast Speakers podcast. If you love this episode, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're looking for your next speaker, or even ready to step onto more stages yourself, you know where to find us, goldcoastspeakers.com.au. I'm JJ Person-Jones, founder of Gold Coast Speakers. And until next time, keep showing up, keep sharing your voice, and making waves.